You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is award-winning producer-director Jake Sumner. And we're going to be talking about his brand new documentary entitled Ron Delsener Presents. Welcome to the show, Jake.
Hi, Jan.
Hi.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So our audience knows what we're talking about. Why don't you give a brief synopsis of what Ron Delsener Presents is all about?
Well, Ron Delsener Presents is about the legendary concert promoter and impresario Ron Delsener, who was kind of the king of New York concerts from the kind of beginnings of contemporary live music as we know it in the mid '60s through to I would say the '90s and beyond. And Ron has a lot to do with kind of the globalized concert business that is today. So it's a bit of a history of live music through the story of Ron Delsener.
And he's been doing this, since the early 60s, thereabouts. He's still alive, and he's still presenting, he's like the Energizer Bunny. He's never going to give up but what he does, because he's passionate about it and he loves what he does. So he has a great, you started this prior to COVID-19. So you had a concept for this movie initially. And because of COVID, you had to shift gears and it became something different. So can we talk about pre-COVID and after COVID?
So yeah, well, pre-COVID, we were just following Ron around with a camera at shows. And at that point in the world, people didn't really care so much about, your access with cameras and things like that at shows. So that was kind of one version of the movie we were doing, and Ron would kind of tell stories in between heading to shows. And this was early days. I just thought Ron was an interesting kind of character and had great stories, and I just was interested in sort of following him around and hearing these stories. And then when COVID happened, we kind of had to shift gears. But it actually, for us, led to a sort of deep dive into his archives. I spent a lot of time in his basement in East Hampton during the pandemic, going through his stuff and his memorabilia. And actually, COVID provided a good amount of time to do that, because there's so much there that needed to be kind of organized and digitized and cataloged. And so COVID actually ended up being a good time to do that.
And he is a savor of absolutely everything, it seems like. So you had plenty to go through it also.
Yeah, he's a hoarder.
He's a hoarder. Okay, I was being polite. You can.
You could call him that. I think he would call himself that. So,
Go ahead.
yeah, no, so he keeps everything. So, it would be a bit of a treasure hunt to find various things. You have to wade through a lot of other stuff that's just, whatever else there is down there. There's a lot of just stuff he's held onto over the years. So it was a big job.
He was the person who, I don't know where he got this idea from, really, even in your film. When the Beatles played Forest Hills, right? And in '64, and then he all of a sudden got this brilliant idea to, like, let's get the bed sheets, let's get the cigarette butts, let's get, whatever they used, the Beatles used, and then auctioned it off. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that, it's kind of like the brilliance of some of these music business pioneers like Ron. I mean, it's the joy he felt seeing the Beatles for the first time live, and that experience he had, but then seeing the opportunity and having the idea of, hang on, I know where they're staying. He helped put on the show, so he called the hotel and said, don't move anything, don't clean the rooms, I'm coming over. And he brought a lawyer, and he brought his dad, who helped him. and he had signed affidavits that these were all the things that belonged to the Beatles. And they took everything in the in the hotel rooms, the pillowcases, the cigarette butts, the food, the Coke bottles, soap.
Oh my goodness.
The bed sheets, they cut the bed sheets into square inches and they sold those. But it's interesting, it's funny. It's a little weird. But it also kind of, in my mind, sort of speaks to the beginning of like merchandise
Yes.
and merchandising and sort of fandom on that level and seeing the opportunity, you know. Um, so,
Did,
Ron is a pioneer in the truest sense.
Yes, he is. Did he make a lot of money selling that merchandise from the rooms?
I don't think so.
no.
When you see the prices of what the things went for, it's not I don't think he I don't think he got rich with that one. But it's funny actually if you look online, I think after the auction, he got Murray the K, the famous DJ who was whatever they call him the fifth Beatle at some point.
Maybe.
He had Murray the K do the auction and auction off all the stuff. And then what was remaining were kind of bed sheets. So he cut them, I think with his family helping him. They cut them into square inches and then they put ads in all the kind of teen magazines um, to buy a square inch of the Beatles bed sheets. Like this is Ringo's bed. Here's a square inch of it. And this is you can still find them. I found one on eBay and I bought one for a couple $100 and I gave it to Ron as a gift. But you can still find them. People have them. So yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like kind of a piece of like Beatles history.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Does he still have some of those things from the Beatles from 1964 in his
No, I don't think,
Basement.
I mean, he might underneath a lot of the other junk. There might be some of the a bar of soap, but no, I don't think so. I think it all disappeared.
So what made you interested in doing a documentary about Ron to begin with? Because listen, I'm grew up in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, but so I used to go to concerts and whatnot in New York, but I was not familiar with him per se. So and he was very well known in New York for all these years and has continued to be. How did you come across him and decide to make this documentary?
Well, I grew up kind of around the live music business, and so Ron Delsener was someone that I was familiar with the name. He was the promoter in New York for a lot of the shows, for all of the shows actually. Um, and it's funny because you speak to some people about Ron Delsener and they go, Ron Delsener, yeah, Ron Delsener Presents. They know, he's a big name to some people, and then others not so much. I think it just depends on your context or various factors. But he was a presence in my mind because he was the guy that sort of put on a lot of the shows, and I was sort of interested in him. I knew him in this kind of peripheral way as someone that we'd be we'd have to shake hands with at the show and meet him and talk to him. But he was always very nice, and he was as people go when you're a young kid, he was one of these kind of people that was happy to like share stories, tell jokes, and he was interested in people, and he's a good talker and a good storyteller. So I was sort of intrigued in that, and kind of over the years would see him at various things and got to know him a little bit more, and thought, he has all these great tales and stories. He could tell you a story about Jimi Hendrix or about, you know, the Beatles hotel room and all the stuff, or a story about Aretha Franklin or, Nina Simone, or any number of incredible stories. Um, Ozzy Osbourne, like vomiting in his car, like just, funny things. And a lot of it didn't make it into the film because there's only so much you can tell in 90 minutes. But I thought, individually these stories are great, but maybe when seen together, uh, they help form a kind of history of live music through his story and kind of how it went from a kind of cottage industry to the multi-billion dollar globalized concert business of today.
When you met him when you were young, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
When you were fairly young?
But the way you meet someone that works with, a parent that you're kind of, oh, hi, we weren't like best friends.
No.
Or he wasn't like an uncle, he was just a guy who was he was
But he used to get you tickets to things when you were a child. Is that correct?
he did do that. Yeah, he did. He got us tickets to like the circus. And we actually in his basement found a thank you letter because he got me and my sister tickets to the Knicks. And we found this is how much of a hoarder Ron is. This I must have been, I think I must have been 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10, somewhere in that, based on the handwriting I could see. But he had the letter. He found the letter in the basement amongst all the piles of stuff, and he was like, "Look what I found." It was
Amazing.
unbelievable. It was unbelievable. So yeah, it was that kind of thing. He would get us tickets for the Knicks, or I remember we went to the Ringling Brothers Circus at Madison Square Garden, and Ron was the guy who could get you tickets for things. So yeah.
So when you were filming this, was there, because he's full of lots of stories, lots and lots of wonderful stories for anybody who loves music and hearing, these stories about these amazing artists that he, continues to present. But was there one in particular when you were filming this that really was surprising for you that when you heard the story?
A story or um hmm.
Or yeah, well, story, because it'll be a story about a concert or about a performer.
I mean, surprising, I don't know, but interesting or kind of fun to explore the story of Simon and Garfunkel in Central Park
Yes.
um was a great story and an honor to kind of tell that story uh and also have access to filming with Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel and Lorne Michaels and Ron, who were kind of the four people really behind it. But seeing how that story kind of unfolded and the kind of game of telephone, I don't want to spoil too much. People should see the movie, but I think that show really came about because of Ron's sort of skills on the telephone and with it didn't start off as a Simon and Garfunkel concert. It started off as a Paul Simon concert or an offer for a Paul Simon concert that I think through Ron's kind of mastery of the telephone became a Simon and Garfunkel concert. So we got to kind of tell that story in the film of how that show happened. And obviously that's a big part of music history.
It truly is a big part of music history. I think we all remember when they got back together in Central Park. Yeah, it was amazing during that time. Were you surprised by he? Let's go back. How was he as far as being filmed? Lots of people don't like to have a camera around them, and some people don't mind it. So you're really following him around a lot, and he's on camera quite a bit. How was his reaction to being filmed? Was that difficult for him or for you as the filmmaker?
Um, no, I mean I would say it's probably like anyone, but Ron is, kind of mercurial and he does tend to you can catch Ron on a good day or a bad day, and that might be age too. And I certainly don't blame him for that. Like I don't know how I would feel about people turning up at my house to film me all the time. So um, I I yeah, I think that's part of the process really is kind of figuring out with the subject, how to kind of be there but not be there, be flexible, and sort of roll with the punches. But I think when Ron was on and into it, it was great. But then I think you have to, when you're making films, sort of be flexible to the idea that this might not be a great day or a great moment. Um, and you kind of have to kind of move. It's like a dance you have to do. Um, but Ron would, sometimes storm off or be like, I'm done with this film. And, that's normal too. And it's all part of it, It's it's part of the fun of making movies or docs at least,
Yeah,
It's
it
real
is.
life.
Yeah, it is. It is.
How long did it take you to film this, Jake?
Well, I don't know. I haven't done a calculation. But it was done over, you know, so pre-pandemic, it's 2019. I think we started, but then it would stop for, you know, we'd have a hiatus of say 6 months at times. Um, and then pick up stuff and, we kind of really got going post-COVID once we had this interview done at the Beacon Theater that became the kind of backbone of the film and the film storytelling. And I believe we did that in 2021, or maybe 2020, maybe 2020 at the kind of at the summer, or was it 2020? I'm sorry. I should know
That's all
this.
right. That's all right.
It's been a long time. It's actually
It
been a
has
while
been
since we made this, and that whole period is a bit of a blur. So it did take a long time to make this film. And then, it's all the filming, but then all the archive, and then all the permissions and all the music and all of it together collectively. It takes a long time. Took
It
me a
does.
long time at least.
Yeah, it does take a long time to do a documentary, and very often a very long time to do an independent film, also. So, uh, definitely. How difficult was it for you to get Garfunkel, and excuse me, my tongue is not working right now, and Paul Simon, and Patti Smith, and many of the other people that you interview in this film, Bette Midler, Gene Simmons, Lauren Michaels, Billy Joel. You interview lots and lots of very famous people, very wonderful people. How difficult was it for you to attract them to this project to talk about Ron?
Actually, that I would say was the easy part.
Really?
Yeah, because I think that so many of them feel a debt of gratitude to Ron, because I think Ron broke a lot of these acts in New York and gave, certainly with Kiss and with Bon Jovi, he gave them really their first big shot. And Patti Smith to an extent too, I think, at Central Park and at the Palladium. Um, I think Patti had been playing clubs mostly, and then those shows were really a breakthrough moment for her. So I think that and I won't mention names, but a few of the acts actually reached out to me, found out that I was doing a documentary and asked to be part of it. So that wasn't hard at all, actually. There were other things that were more challenging, but getting sort of the acts and talent to be involved was quite easy.
That's great.
Luckily.
Yes, luckily that is right. I had the opportunity when I lived in New York. I lived next door to Tony Bon Jovi's recording studio, and I met him. I was up on my roof one day, and he was up there, and he said, "Hey, we're doing a recording session tonight." He didn't tell me who it was. Said, "Hey, would you like to come on over and meet the crew and all of that?" And I said, "Of course I would." And it was Jon Bon Jovi.
But like young Bon Jovi, like
Yeah, this is back in the 80s. This is back in the late 80s. So early Bon.
he began, I think, right? He worked at the studio, I think, is the story.
He may have, but at this point he was well known. He his career had was definitely they were recording an album and at that studio, so it was a real privilege and a real surprise too.
I think that's how he recorded his early demos because he was working in his uncle's studio, and I think his uncle, in exchange for like his work, would like give him studio time. So anyway, yeah, Jon is like was a really wonderful guy and a really supportive person for our project, and just a great human being too.
Yeah, and his uncle was also.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's still alive or not.
They're good guys, those Bon Jovis.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So what do you want people to take away from this documentary?
Well, I think it's a personal sort of story and the story of an individual, but I think it's also a vehicle to look at kind of the bigger story of live music, and the kind of history of live music in some ways, I would like to say without sounding too grandiose. So I think for a lot of people today, you go on StubHub or Ticketmaster and you buy a ticket, or if you're not lucky enough to kind of get it there, you go on the secondary and you go on StubHub or any of these things. And I don't know, it's just a different sort of thing and a different, I think live music it is what it is, and there's no sort of putting the genie back in the bottle. But I wanted to sort of tell the story of how the business kind of became what it became, for better or worse, and sort of talk and tell the story of how it went from kind of cottage industry, very lo-fi, to sort of this giant global industry that it is today, and use a figure like Ron. I mean, not everyone, you couldn't do that with just anyone. You kind of have to be a character, I think, to sort of you have to be compelling enough, like Ron is, to want to sort of follow that journey. But yeah, I like it as a sort of way to look at the history of live music, or at least a piece of it. I'd like people to hopefully, a lot of people know this stuff and they know the history and they know far more than me, but a lot of people don't. I think the record business gets a lot more credit than maybe the live music business does when it comes to music history. So I thought to maybe talk about some of these shows and about how they came together was a good idea.
It is. Everybody, seek out Ron Delsener Presents. Where can people see it, Jake?
Well, it's opening at the Quad Cinema downtown Manhattan on 13th Street on May 30th. And I believe it's playing until June the 5th. And then I think it's playing in a bunch of other theaters as well across the country throughout the summer. And I think you could learn more by going to www.rondelsenerpresentsfilm.com. And there you'll find a list of everywhere it's playing, in various theaters across the US.
Perfect. Well, everybody seek out Ron Delsener Presents. If you love music and you want to know the history, this is a great documentary that delves deeply into the beginning of the concert business, really, as we know it today. So thank you so much, Jake, for being on the show and for making this wonderful documentary. I wish you much success.
Thanks, Jan. It was great talking to you.
You too. Thanks, Jake. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.